When we talk about UFO cases, what comes to mind? Perhaps the famous Roswell incident. But what if I told you there's an even more mysterious case? A case that took place in 1977 in northern Brazil, where local communities were terrorized by mysterious flying objects. On its own, that would be fascinating enough. But what truly sets this case apart is who's telling it. Colonel Hollanda, a Brazilian Air Force officer and in charge of Operation Saucer, breaks his 20-year silence in an exclusive interview with Brazilian UFO Magazine, revealing the details of this covert military operation. From now on, you will follow the account from the perspective of the UFO Magazine reporter who conducted the interview. I am the file keeper, and welcome to my archive. Working for UFO Magazine was like walking a fine line between skepticism and wonder. Our mission was clear: to investigate, document, and share accounts of phenomena that defied conventional explanation, always committed to bringing to light what others preferred to ignore. That afternoon, as I reviewed the latest report on UFO sightings in rural Brazil, the phone rang. On the other end, a colleague's voice delivered the news that would change the course of my week.
The Colonel agreed to talk.
It was impossible to miss the gravity of that statement. Colonel Hollanda, the man behind the mysterious Operation Saucer, had decided to break decades of silence. He was ready to grant an exclusive interview. Hours later, I was already on a flight to Rio de Janeiro, heading to Cabo Frio. The weight of the meeting was almost tangible, but the chance to hear first-hand accounts from someone who had lived through one of Brazil's most enigmatic UFO investigations was too significant to pass up. When I arrived in the city, I headed straight to the address provided. Standing in front of a simple building near the shore, I took a deep breath before climbing the stairs. Behind that door was a man who not only encountered the unknown, but carried secrets that could forever change our understanding of the UFO phenomenon. The door creaked open, revealing Colonel Hollanda. The soft lighting inside the apartment partially illuminated his face, highlighting features marked by time and something deeper, an experience lived intensely and guarded in silence for decades.
Good evening, please come in,
he said politely, his tone carrying the weight of what was about to be shared. The apartment was modest but tidy. Books and documents scattered across a table hinted that he had been revisiting long-buried memories. Outside, the darkness was interrupted only by the steady sound of waves crashing on the shore. The living room was dimly lit, with the yellow glow of a single lamp creating an almost intimate atmosphere. Hollanda gestured toward an armchair and sat across from me, a cup of coffee in his hand.
Would you like some?
He asked, nodding toward a coffee pot on a tray. I nodded, and as he poured, he seemed to gauge my reactions carefully, as if testing whether I was ready for what he was about to reveal. I placed my recorder on the table, checking quickly to make sure everything was in order. Shall we begin? I asked, doing my best to keep a neutral tone, though my heart was racing. Hollanda nodded.
Yes, I'm ready.
The following interview is a faithful transcript with minor adjustments to provide context for certain acronyms and individuals mentioned during the account. It is based on a real interview conducted with retired Brazilian Air Force Colonel Bolivar Soares Nogueira de Hollanda Lima, originally published in the Brazilian ufology magazine UFO. Colonel, you are the first military officer to come forward and admit everything you're about to in this interview. What are the reasons for that?
In 1977, when the events I'm about to describe took place, I was approached many times by ufologists and the media to make a statement about it. But I couldn't speak at the time because I had a military obligation. I had completed a mission and couldn't reveal what it was. My loyalty was solely to my commander. But after 4 months of studies and research, the Air Force suspended Operation Saucer. The commander was satisfied with the results, and at that time, it wasn't for me to judge whether it was right or wrong.
So, you avoided talking about Operation Saucer all this time?
I couldn't speak, and I didn't want to either. I spoke with several ufologists, including General Uchoa, and I was even approached by people from the USA, including Bob Pratt.
Are you referring to the American author?
Yes. We talked a lot off the record. My position as a military officer would have put the Ministry of Aeronautics in a difficult situation to explain, and there were also punishments for anyone who spoke about the matter without authorization. I didn't have permission from my commander, let alone the minister, and anything I said would have been interpreted as the official word of the Brazilian Air Force. Even so, after the end of Operation Saucer, I researched and kept in touch with ufologists from several countries, and I never spoke about it.
You retired from the Brazilian Air Force in 1992. Did it ever cross your mind to speak with ufologists earlier and share these facts?
I only spoke with them without going into details. I talked a lot with Bob Pratt when he came to Brazil, with Mrs. Irene Granchi, Rafael Sempere Durar, and others. But I never said I wanted to speak on television or anything like that. They asked me to write a book, but I was never interested. Today I think differently. I believe something should already be said about Operation Saucer. This subject needs to be shared and explained because I'm about to turn 60. Suddenly, I could die, and then the story ends.
By choosing UFO Magazine to make these statements, does it mean you trust the magazine to do a serious job of disseminating what you are saying?
Many years ago, in 1987 or 1988, I spoke with you, but I couldn't authorize the publication of anything we discussed in your magazine. Even so, you went ahead, believing the topic couldn't remain hidden. At the time, I was on active duty and couldn't give any formal statements. What was published was without permission, which caused us some complications back then. But it needed to be said. A few years later, I was already retired, and things had changed. I could make statements without issues. And because I trust you, UFO Magazine, and its members, today I feel more comfortable speaking without risking this being turned into sensationalism. I don't believe this magazine would give such a tone to this story just to boost sales.
Thank you for your trust, Colonel. But how did it all start? What sparked your interest in ufology? Was it before Operation Saucer?
In 1952, I was 12 years old and standing by the window of my house in Belém when some very large objects appeared and caught my attention. There was an immense light over the city. The next day, the story was in the newspaper. The article said that the object had hovered over a scout federation during a swimming competition, and everyone saw it. That was when my interest in these things began, long before I became a military officer and well before Operation Saucer. I've always believed in extraterrestrial life and the possibility that they might be curious about observing us. We are a planet with intelligent life, which must spark the interest of extraterrestrials.
Did you join the Air Force because of your interest in life beyond Earth?
No, I've always had a great passion for aviation and military life. As an aviator in the Brazilian Air Force, I became the head of the logistics service, where I had many responsibilities. My role was to provide administrative and financial support for the operations of the command I served. I also served as the head of operations for the intelligence service of my command. This task was tied to state security, combating subversive movements during the turmoil following the revolution of 1964. We fought against terrorist actions and communist parties attempting to infiltrate the country.
Your resume also includes a particularly intriguing position as Chief of the Jungle Special Operations Service. You must have countless stories to share.
Yes, the Brazilian Air Force had a project to create a border necklace. It was the idea of an incredibly intelligent brigadier named Camarão, who had extensive knowledge of the Amazon. He wanted to establish key points along the borders, building airstrips every 200 kilometers next to Catholic or Protestant religious missions, and settling groups there to provide assistance to the indigenous population. The Brazilian Air Force would provide support for all of this. I worked on this operation as a paratrooper because I had a strong aptitude for that type of activity.
You must have carried out many missions in the jungle. Did you encounter a lot of indigenous people?
Yes, there were many indigenous tribes, with several members clearing areas in the forest for the construction of airstrips. Some were assimilated into modern culture, while others were not. Still, we frequently worked on missions in contact with them. At the time, the actions of the Parasar often complemented these efforts. I was a paratrooper responsible for search and rescue missions in the jungle.
During that time, did you come across any archaeological discoveries or observations made by military personnel in the Amazon linked to this program?
Yes, some colleagues had such experiences. One of my friends reported that he was flying over the jungle and was startled to see a pyramidal formation covered by vegetation in the middle of nowhere. It seemed to indicate the existence of an ancient civilization that had been abandoned, with the jungle taking over everything. But there was a clear pyramidal formation with perfect angles in the Amazon. I can't pinpoint the exact location, but if I'm not mistaken, it was near the Jaguari River region. This was reported to me by Colonel Valerio.
Colonel, now that we've learned much about your work with the FAB, let's talk about ufology. What was your first official involvement in ufological research within the Air Force? Was it Operation Saucer, or was there something before that?
Not from my end, no. My work was focused solely on state security and matters involving national security. It had nothing to do with UFOs or extraterrestrials. But I was aware of some cases happening in the Amazon.
Did these cases, in any way, draw interest or concern from the armed forces as a potential external threat to national sovereignty?
They weren't viewed as an external threat. UFOs were regarded more as a questionable phenomenon. Some officers, perhaps even most, considered UFOs to be improbable and made a lot of jokes about them. They joked so much that I think it was sheer luck that Operation Saucer happened. I believe it only came about because the commander of the Comar, the first regional air command at the time, was very interested in the topic and believed in UFOs.
How did the idea for Operation Saucer come about? Was it your project, the first Coma commanders, or something from the government?
I wasn't in Belém at the time. Although I was serving there, I was attending a course in Brasilia. When I returned, I reported to the head of the second section of Comar, and he asked me if I believed in flying saucers. It caught me off guard. I didn't even know there was any research going on about the subject. When I said I did, he replied, "Then you're in charge of this case," and handed me a folder with the materials. That was the beginning of the operation, which I would be in charge of, even though it didn't yet have a name.
If you received a folder from your superior, does that mean an investigation was already underway?
Yes, when I returned from Brasilia, agents were already being sent to investigate UFO occurrences, because this had been happening for a long time in the Colares region, an island belonging to the municipality of Vigia on Para's coast. The city's mayor sent a formal request to the Comar commander, reporting that UFOs were greatly troubling the fishermen. Some couldn't even continue their work because the objects would hover over their boats. Sometimes they would even dive near the vessels in the rivers and seas. The local population was staying up all night, lighting bonfires and setting off fireworks to try to scare off the invaders. The panic led the mayor to contact Comar's command, requesting action, and the brigadier ordered me to investigate the occurrences.
Was the capital Brasilia involved or instructing this matter to be investigated?
At the time, I wasn't part of any discussions. I was just a captain and simply followed orders. I wasn't involved in those processes and don't know exactly how the decisions were made. But from what little I know, the decision came from Comar's command. If Brasilia was involved, I wasn't aware of it.
How did you structure Operation Saucer, divisions, personnel, missions, etc.? How did you organize all the tasks?
Well, we were a team. I was the leader. We had 5 agents, all sergeants, who worked in the second section of Comar. Additionally, we had numerous informants, locals in areas where the lights appeared, who assisted us. Sometimes I would divide the team into 2 or 3 observation posts in the forest. Of course, we always stayed in constant radio contact.
What was the immediate goal of Operation Saucer? To observe UFOs, photograph them, or establish contact?
Honestly, I wanted to get to the bottom of the whole thing. I wanted to bring it to light because everyone was talking about the lights and objects, and they even had popular nicknames like Chupa Chupa. The Brazilian Air Force needed to know what was really happening, as it involved Brazilian airspace, and it was our responsibility to investigate. At the beginning of Operation Saucer, my main goal was simply to confirm what was happening.
What led the local population to call the lights Chupa Chupa?
There were numerous accounts of people being struck by a beam of light. All of them believed that the effect was sucking their blood. And it really did seem so. The name Chupa Chupa, which means suck-suck in Portuguese, reflects this belief. We investigated several cases and discovered that many of the victims, especially women, had strange marks on their left breasts, resembling two needle pricks around a brownish spot, like an iodine burn. These lights would extract a small amount of blood, which led to them being nicknamed Chupa Chupa. The pattern was consistent. A light would appear out of nowhere, follow someone, usually a woman, and strike her on the left breast. Occasionally, men were affected, with marks on their arms or legs. Statistically, out of every 10 cases, about 8 involved women and 2 involved men.
Did you document the marks found on people?
Yes, everything was observed and analyzed by doctors, who sometimes accompanied us to the sites. Honestly, I entered this operation as a skeptic. I wanted to debunk the story and report to my commander that it wasn't real, that it was collective hysteria or something like that. I believed people were seeing something, but not extraterrestrials.
What did you think was being seen and even attacking people?
I wasn't sure. Perhaps it was something like the plumage of an owl reflecting moonlight or some other natural phenomenon. While I believed in extraterrestrials, I didn't think that's what people were seeing. I went there to find out for myself. For at least 2 months, I reported back to my commander, after returning from missions, that we hadn't discovered anything. These were the first 2 months of Operation Saucer, during which I saw nothing that could change my opinion. Sometimes I'd spend a week in the forest and only return on Sundays to spend a little time with my family. Each time I returned, my commander would ask, "Did you see anything?" And my answer was always, "Indeed, we saw flashing lights that flew at low altitude, but nothing too strange."
That was during the night. What happened during the day? Did you have any other activities incorporated into Operation Saucer?
Yes, we had other tasks that were part of the operation's objectives. We conducted interviews with people who had experiences, prepared locations to stay overnight, and searched for hotspots to keep watch. When we discovered something had appeared in a certain place, we went there. We assessed the situation and always registered the names of those involved in a specific form.
What procedure or methodology was used to collect information?
We always recorded the name of the person who had the experience, the location, time, etc. We described each event that occurred in the same area. If 3 incidents happened in one night, we listened to 3 witnesses. Some descriptions were common, others more peculiar. Occasionally, we received reports of things we couldn't verify, like the dematerialization of entire walls or roofs.
How so? Do you have a case to illustrate such an occurrence?
Yes. The first woman I interviewed in Colares, for instance, told me absurd things. We had taken a helicopter from Belém just to hear from a woman who had been attacked by the Chupa Chupa. I noticed she indeed had a mark on her left breast. It was brown, like a burn, with 2 puncture marks. When we talked, she told me she was sitting in a hammock putting a child to sleep when the environment suddenly began to change temperature. She found it strange but didn't imagine what was about to happen. Lying in the hammock, she saw the roof tiles turning red, glowing like embers. Then they became transparent, and she could see the sky through the roof. It was as if the tiles had turned to glass. She saw the sky and even the stars.
Were bizarre stories like this common during the execution of Operation Saucer?
Very much so, and they scared me a lot because I had never heard of such things. Hearing these stories made me increasingly concerned and curious. These people seemed sincere. For example, through the hole the woman described, she saw a green light shining in the sky. She felt somewhat numb until suddenly a red beam from the UFO struck her left breast. Interestingly, most of the time people were hit on the left side. There's more. Exactly as we were talking about this, a girl approached and said, "Look, it's passing over us." When I left the house, I saw the light she was pointing at, moving at a reasonable speed, even though the sky was heavily overcast. It wasn't too fast and blinked every second as it headed north. It almost looked like a satellite, except that this light turned back toward us. And satellites don't do that. Then things became even stranger. Even so, I couldn't say it was an extraterrestrial craft. After all, I wasn't there to classify anything as a UFO. The operation was named Saucer, as a reference to how flying discs are commonly called around the world and following the Armed Forces Code, which mandates that the mission's purpose remain unidentified.
Did you use any radar equipment that could confirm or track these phenomena?
No, all airports have fixed radars. We didn't carry anything like that.
Were the attacks that were happening frequently communicated to the government, state, or local authorities?
Yes, of course. Several doctors from the Pará State Health Department were sent by the government to examine the people. They would examine the burn marks and take statements from the patients, but they didn't do anything else. They couldn't. Some victims recovered easily, while others were very scared. Some said they felt nauseous, with their bodies numb for several days. One citizen once came to me to report that a light had appeared near his house, shining a bright ray in his direction. He said he was so scared that he ran inside his house, grabbed a weapon and pointed it at the light. Then another stronger ray hit him, causing him to fall. The poor man spent about 15 days with movement problems, but nothing more serious happened. He wasn't hit by anything solid, like a bullet, for example. It seems that the nature of this light is a very strong energy that leaves people immobilized. I believe federal authorities were informed that this type of attack on humans was happening in the region, but I have no proof of it. I only received orders from my commander, nothing more.
If these statements were collected from the beginning of Operation Saucer, when did you have your first direct contact with UFOs in that region?
It was quite significant. One night, our team was researching on Mosqueiro Island, at a place called Bahia de Sol, a well-known resort area near Belém, very close to Colares, as we had information that strange events were happening there. Since we were investigating all possible signs of UFO phenomena, we focused on the area. During this period, the agents who had been in the operation longer than I had, as I had joined later, kept asking me after seeing some lights if I was already convinced of the phenomenon's existence. Since I was still undecided, they would say, "But Captain, don't you believe it yet?" I would reply that I needed more proof to believe that those things were UFOs. Until then, I had only seen lights, many of them, but I wasn't satisfied yet.
Did they start the operation earlier? And had they seen more things? What happened then?
Yes, they had seen more things and believed more than I did. They kept pressuring me, "How can you not believe?" One of those agents was sub-officer who used to joke with me, saying that I was a skeptic until one of these things came and landed right on my head. "When that happens and a ship lights up over you, I want to see," he would say, always mocking my disbelief. And I would respond, "It has to be a big ship, very visible, or I won't believe it." And why did I say that night? We had just made these jokes when suddenly something unexpected happened. A light appeared, coming from the north, heading toward us. It then stopped for a few moments, made a circle around where we were, and then left. It was amazing. The undeniable proof that I couldn't contest anymore. I had asked for it, and there it was. That's when the team had a good laugh. Then the soldiers asked me, "So do you believe now?"
When did this happen?
In November 1977, right at the beginning of the operation. The object had a light that resembled metal welding, like electric welding. It was curious because when I was a boy, I used to hear many stories about things we couldn't see because they had a very strong light. And that's exactly what I saw along with my team, a strong, intense blue light. But I didn't see the shape of the UFO, just the light it emitted.
Did you photograph this bright object?
We photographed everything that appeared, but we had a dance with the photos for about 2 months because nothing would show up. We always had the objects well in focus, filling the entire frame of the camera, but when we developed the negatives, nothing appeared. We would sometimes think, now it will work, but nothing. This happened frequently until an unusual event occurred. I was analyzing the positives, very frustrated that we couldn't capture the images we saw during our missions, when I took a flashlight that I used during jungle operations and did an experiment. That was a lucky moment.
What happened then?
The flashlight had a normal strong light on one end and a red cover on the other, used for jungle signaling. It was made of a semi-transparent plastic material, similar to a car's rear light. By removing the red cover, there was a frosted glass. I looked at that and remembered that doctors examine X-rays using a device with an opaque frame and light behind it. Editor's note, radioscope. This device helps create light and shadow contrast on an X-ray plate. So I had the idea to take a developed film and hold it against the frosted glass of my jungle flashlight. That's when I could see a point I hadn't noticed before. I wasn't looking for a mark or any object. I was looking for a light, because that's what we had seen in the jungle when we took the photos. But the light wouldn't appear. Instead, the solid object behind it did. In the roll I was analyzing, I saw a cylinder, which appeared in all the other frames. It became clear that I couldn't print the UFO's light on the photo, but I could print its solid part. Maybe due to the wavelength, I don't know. I didn't understand why the UFO's light didn't imprint on the film, only the solid part. We concluded that the object must have been a cylindrical probe.
Did you take many photos of UFOs like this?
Oh yes. We took over 500, dozens of film rolls, a cardboard box full of them. In almost every frame, there were UFOs or probes. And get this, all those negatives were right in front of me for almost 2 months of work, and we couldn't get anything. There was no light at all in the photos. Then, after what I discovered, we went back to look at them again, and there were fantastic images. After that, we just sent them to the Comar lab for enlarging, and we saw beautiful probes and UFOs in the photographs. Dozens of them.
After your discovery, did you take new photos?
Yes, with the help of a friend named Milton Mendonça, who has since passed away. He was a cameraman for TV Liberal in Belém and knew a lot about photography. I asked for his help because I trusted him a lot and knew that by joining the operation with us, he wouldn't share anything with anyone. So I informed my commander that I was having difficulties with the photographic process, and he authorized Milton to join the operation. He went with us on some vigils and always helped us. He even instructed us to use special films with infrared, ultraviolet, etc. We requested the material from our superiors in Brasilia, and they sent us excellent films. With this, we started getting better results. We were able to photograph large objects and shapes that we hadn't even imagined.
As for the shape, what was the most common pattern these objects presented?
In the beginning of Operation Saucer, we saw what everyone was talking about, probes and flashing lights. There was even an American priest named Alfredo de la O, who has since passed away, who gave descriptions of probes and objects in that shape. He was a parish priest in Colares and talked about a probe he had seen several times. According to Alfredo, it was about the size of a 200-liter oil drum. This probe had an irregular flight path. It wasn't a safe trajectory. It flew as if it was swaying and emitted a light. Sometimes it flew alongside others, coming and going from one point to another. One day it came close to us from above.
Did you notice any kind of interaction between what you were doing and the behavior of the phenomenon?
This question is very interesting because it was a very strange thing. They, whoever they were, seemed absolutely certain of where we were and what we were doing. It seemed like they were looking for us, because when we least expected it, there they were, right above us. No more than a month after we started frequenting the locations of the sightings, these probes began coming directly to us. Sometimes we would move from one place to another, and there they would be, following us almost the entire time, as if they knew our movements.
Before Operation Saucer, was there already a preliminary investigation about UFO cases in Pará?
The mayor of Colares reported to the Comar that UFOs were flying over the region.
So, you're saying that the UFOs somehow seem to care about the activities of Operation Saucer?
Well, at least they knew what we were doing. For example, in the case of Baía do Sol, something peculiar happened. At that time, the school year was coming to an end, and many people would stay at the beach at night. There were at least 100,000 people on the shore that weekend. However, a probe came towards us, to a completely dark place where no one else was around. Why did it come to us in the dark, when so many people were close by on the beach?
Was that the first major UFO event involving you?
I wouldn't say it was major, but it was quite significant. That morning, we returned to the Comar base. That's when I spoke with my commander and said that for the first time, something strange had happened.
Did you have any physical reactions from this event? Any issues resulting from the observation?
At that very moment, no, but later I noticed that we all lost some visual sharpness. Over time, our vision weakened further, to the point where we all started wearing glasses. but that was because of other exposures we had later on with numerous other contacts.
Colonel, after such an event, as we know, you would have written a full report, which was integrated into Operation Saucer. But did you also undergo any kind of medical examination?
A report was made about the event, including the time, location, geographical coordinates, region mapping, etc. It was very descriptive. But we never had to undergo a medical exam because we never had any problems.
When your commander received the news about what happened, how did he react?
He was quite pleased, very happy. It seemed that his reaction was one of great approval.
Did these UFO cases repel each other? What else do you remember that you can tell us?
Well, since Bahia do Sol was a very favorable place for UFO observations, we began to visit the area regularly. We had friends in the National Information Service, the SNI, who had nothing to do with this, but they would accompany some of our missions. The agents were our acquaintances, and they were curious, so they would go with us. Sometimes, news about the sightings would come out in local newspapers, which caused many people in Belém to talk about the sightings. My wife and my brother knew about the things I was doing, but beyond that circle, no one outside the Comar base knew the details. Even so, I always asked my wife and brother to keep it very discreet. They didn't even ask for details.
Did the population of Belém know about the operation in the region?
No, but they knew that we, from the Air Force, were there, keeping an eye on everything. Some people knew that there was an operation going on, but they didn't know its name or the results. Others knew small details, like that I was a captain or that so-and-so was a sergeant. But no one knew the mission's results. What people suspected was that we were investigating. Just that. In the case of SNI officials, when they asked to go, I said it was no problem, but that they should ask for permission from their boss. And their boss authorized them, but not as part of the intelligence service, only to satisfy their curiosity.
Did the National Information Service develop any UFO-related work after that?
No, the agents just wanted to see those things flying with our team. They knew we were doing serious work at certain vigil sites, and since they trusted our experience, they followed us to the most probable UFO sighting spots. One day, along with Milton Mendonça, we arrived at Bahia do Sol around 6 p.m. and set up our photographic equipment. We stayed in a dark, secluded spot, watching for what might happen. However, for personal reasons, I had to leave earlier that night to be in Belém by 8 p.m., as I had an appointment. Around 6:30 p.m., 3 bright points appeared in the sky, very high, moving at great speed. And I know planes, and I can tell you that the speed of these objects was much higher than average. The points were flying west to east. At 7 p.m., 2 more strange blinking objects appeared, aligned one after the other, flying north to south.
What sequence did the events follow?
Well, the SNI people hadn't arrived yet. We had arranged to meet at 6 p.m. We were waiting for them to join our vigil. So I waited a bit longer, and when we started packing up the equipment because I could no longer wait, they finally arrived and asked if anything had happened. I joked, saying I had scheduled for 6 p.m. and they only showed up at 7 p.m., referring to the fact that UFOs pass by almost every hour there. One of them then asked a silly question. What time does the next one pass? I said I didn't know, and that it wasn't a bus to have a schedule. I also said they should stay there all night waiting to see UFOs. At that moment, while we were talking, one of them said, "Look up now." Look up. That's when we froze, because there was this huge thing right above us. It was a black disc, dark, hovering at no more than 150 meters above us, exactly where we were.
It must have been a fantastic and terrifying experience. Did the object with lights make any noise? Did it move?
It stayed still, but it had a light in the middle that went from yellow to amber, and it made a noise like an air conditioner. It sounded like the noise of a bicycle's gear when pedaling backward. That thing was huge, maybe 30 meters in diameter. We watched it for a long time until it started emitting a very strong yellow light that illuminated the ground, repeating this every short interval about 5 more times.
What was the reaction of the SNI members?
It wasn't just the SNI people. Everyone was shocked. I myself had never seen anything like it, and I had been in this operation for almost 2 months. A ship like that had never appeared to us. It was so unexpected that we didn't even think to set up the camera again, which was already packed, because we were about to leave. It also didn't make sense to try since it was packed in special boxes and it would take too long to unpack, set up and mount. All we could do was stand there, staring, stunned by that thing lighting everything up with a strong yellow light that would go off and on.
It seems like they were giving you a demonstration, flickering in that strange way.
Yes, the UFO did this in 2-second intervals. It would go off, then on, go off again. It was a progressive light that didn't flash, but grew and returned to the same intensity. We even felt like something could happen because it was dark. It was a very isolated spot, and no one knew we were there. Just us and them.
Was there any occasion when other teams from different government agencies participated alongside you?
No, what I know is that there was a leak of information about Operation Saucer. Some people were talking about the sightings. I believe the leak occurred at the Belém Aero Club. Once, a team from the newspaper O Estado do Pará went to the place where we were camped and, knowing we were in the area, stayed on the lookout. Another time they made a mistake. They went to a location where they thought we'd be, but ended up in the wrong place, as we were elsewhere. During one of these adventures, they saw something, but it was so strange that they never returned. Some reporters swore they would never go on such a mission again. They saw a light approaching at a low altitude and got in their car to get closer. The light came to where they were and focused a beam on them. From what I heard, the car's roof became translucent, as if it were made of glass. Then the object maneuvered over the car, even allowing them to take photos. The pictures were published in a full-page spread. They were incredibly clear. But after the fright they experienced, the witnesses fled in the car. It seems some vomited and became emotionally unbalanced. The person who can provide information about this is Pinon Frias, who was the pilot of the Belém Aero Club. Bizarre stories, like UFO attacks on humans, were very common during the work. This scared us a lot, making us both worried and curious at the same time.
With all these events happening, and you constantly sending reports to your superiors, did you ever ask if there was a possibility of informing the public about the occurrences and Operation Saucer?
No, that question was never raised because we already knew it wasn't possible for the public to learn about these events. It wouldn't have been appropriate to ask my command that question, as it was classified information. My mission was to collect data and deliver it to the commander, and that was handled with confidentiality. We had to document, photograph and film the UFOs if possible, and deliver everything to Comar. From there, the fate of the material was their responsibility.
Do you have any idea what was done with the material?
The reports, drawings and photos were prepared, classified, passed on to the commander, and archived at Comar in a secure room. After that, some were sent to Brasilia, according to what I was informed at the time. However, as far as I know, the reaction from higher-ups was one of skepticism. Some colleagues even joked about the events.
Were you aware that the Brazilian Air Force had established an official research system almost 10 years earlier, in 1969, called the System for Investigation of Unidentified Aerial Objects?
At that time, in 1969, I was a lieutenant at the Belém Air Base, and several informative booklets on the subject were distributed to us. We were asked to volunteer to prepare reports with witness statements if we were interested in the topic. That was all. Later, discussions on the matter faded away.
At any point, did American military personnel request information or details about your work in the operation?
Not that I know of. If that happened, it was at higher levels, and as I said, I was just a captain. I didn't get involved in those things and couldn't have known about them.
Was the incidence of this phenomenon in the Amazon during Operation Saucer a daily occurrence?
Yes, it was daily and very active. We identified at least 9 forms of UFOs. We were able to determine and classify them. Some were probes, while others were large craft from which smaller objects emerged. We filmed all of this, including the smaller craft returning to the larger motherships. Everything was very well documented.
What equipment did you use to record all this activity?
We had professional Nikon cameras with telephoto lenses ranging from 300 to 1000 millimeters, which were quite large. It was nerve-wracking to work with them because their focus was extremely fast. Any slight mistake or wrong move, and we'd lose the UFOs. But they were top-notch equipment. We also had video cameras and audio recorders in case any noise could be heard or anything else that could be captured.
Did you expect these craft to make contact with you, if that was even one of Operation Source's objectives?
We were exposed to everything. To be honest, and I'm not being mysterious, anything could have happened, whether in the woods, the jungle, or on the beaches. We were on a military operation, and as such, were obliged to endure everything. Whatever happened would have been in the line of duty.
Did you carry weapons during the missions?
No, not at any time. I never thought of carrying a weapon, not even just in case. We didn't expect there would be a need for one. For that reason, we never even considered the possibility, even during the logistical planning of the operation. Food, transportation, communication, etc.
But was there ever a moment during the operation when you realized the phenomenon could be dangerous?
Once, yes. It was the appearance of something very intense. When this happened, I was afraid an abduction might occur. I only mentioned it to a few people, and one of them, my friend Rafael Sempere Durar, severely reprimanded me for exposing myself to something dangerous. "You irresponsible madman, you have a commander. But I'm your friend, and I'm forbidding you from doing such a thing," he said angrily when he found out what had happened. The event was indeed serious. During Operation Saucer, we were on a boat anchored on the banks of the Jari River when something enormous stopped no more than 70 meters from the boat.
What were the characteristics of this thing?
To answer, I have to explain why we were there. Well, we went to the location because I have a friend, a Brazilian Air Force officer at the time, Captain Victor Polonés, who loved fishing and frequented the area. One day, knowing about our investigation, he told me about a young man who worked collecting clay for a nearby brickworks. The brickworks belonged to Paulo Kofa from Belém. The young man's name was Luis, and he told me an incredible story. He said that one day, while gathering clay, he saw traces of a paca eating leftover flowers from a tree by the river and decided to track it down to hunt it. He returned to the brickworks, emptied the batelão, prepared a shotgun, and went back to the spot, where he set up camp in a tree. He hung his hammock and waited with a flashlight and shotgun, ready for the animal to appear.
And then, what happened next?
Well, when he heard a noise and thought it was the animal, a very bright light passed by him, then returned and stopped overhead. From the center of this craft, described as similar to the cabin of a Boeing 737, a door or something like it opened, and a human-like figure descended. Luis told me he didn't see a rope ladder or metal stairs, but said the being descended via a beam of light, arms outstretched. When it approached, Luis realized he was in danger, jumped out and hid in a nearby tree, watching what happened. The being came with a red light in its hand, not a flashlight, but something in its palm, and examined the hammock left in the tree. It also looked at the place where Luis had been and everything around, but didn't search for him or investigate further. It went directly to where Luis was hiding, terrified. Quickly, it focused a red beam of light on him, making him run into the vegetation.
The strange being automatically sensed where Luis was and went after him. That doesn't sound good.
Indeed. But Luis escaped through a riverbank, struggling to walk over logs and roots. Then the being returned to the craft, which began to follow him along the river's course at low speed and altitude, maybe at treetop level. Luis moved slowly and couldn't reach the boat ahead as he'd hoped. Helpless, he shouted and attracted the attention of some people who came to his aid. When they saw what was happening, they jumped into the water, observing from a distance with only their eyes visible. What they witnessed was incredible. The craft stopped over the batelão, the same being descended and examined the entire boat, just as it had with the hammock. Then it returned to the craft, the door closed, and the UFO sped away. I spoke with Luis at Comar and decided to visit the site to assess the situation. When we arrived, it was around 7 p.m. and it was raining moderately. The agents entered the caretaker's house at the brickworks. As the team leader, I didn't go inside. I stayed alert, waiting to see if anything would happen.
The interview was long, stretching on for hours. We spoke in detail about Operation Saucer, revisiting every detail, every mystery. When we finally said our goodbyes, I caught the first flight back to the UFO Magazine headquarters, where I dove into the task of editing the article. As soon as it was published, the impact was immediate. The article shed new light on Operation Saucer, a topic that had, until then, been obscured by time. Not only did it draw attention, but it paved the way for a wave of TV programs and other media to explore the topic in the years that followed. But what happened afterward, I must admit, caught me completely off guard. I stayed in touch with the Colonel to schedule further interviews. He seemed willing to share even more, to delve into details that hadn't made it into our first conversation. Then, about a month after the interview, while I was working at the office, the phone rang. It was another reporter from UFO Magazine, and the weight in his voice immediately alarmed me.
"I'm so sorry. The Colonel has passed."
A silence hung in the air before I managed to ask, "What do you mean? What happened?" The voice on the other end hesitated before responding.
"He left us by his own choice."
I was stunned. Up until that moment, the Colonel had seemed calm, balanced. Nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested that anything was troubling him enough to lead to such an extreme act. He had appeared confident, even relieved, to finally speak freely now that he was retired from the military. And now this. According to the official narrative, his passing was self-inflicted. However, living in an environment surrounded by secrets and situations where many truths can never become public, that explanation has always felt incomplete to me. I couldn't help but wonder, was it truly his decision? Or had revealing such sensitive information drawn the attention of those who preferred these secrets remain buried? Two of his statements during the interview make me question this even more.
"I was already retired, and things had changed. I could make statements without issues. I believe something should already be said about Operation Saucer. This subject needs to be shared and explained because I'm about to turn 60. Suddenly, I could die, and then the story ends."
What really happened may never come to light. The answers died with him, and the mystery, like so many others surrounding Operation Saucer, endures. And so, yet another potentially unsettling truth was lost to silence. Thanks for being part of this journey through another mysterious file. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more intriguing stories, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you're always up to date. In the description, you'll find links for those who want to explore the Operation Saucer case further, including the full interview published by UFO Magazine and a video featuring part of Colonel Hollanda's interview, fully subtitled. If you're curious about more real UFO files like this one, click on one of the related videos and keep uncovering these fascinating mysteries. See you in the next file.